Hey, how's it going today? Kevin Cleary here with The View from the Pew. I want to start today by reading you a headline from the Daily Post, a paper in Scotland. It says this: parents outraged as extremist U.S. religious sect hand out creationist books and preach to kids at Scottish school. So there's the headline. If you go on to read the article, you find that Alex Gear, preacher at the Westmains Church of Christ in Kilbride, Scotland, and many other volunteers from the Westmains Church of Christ in Kilbride were involved in helping kids with homework and a little bit of tutoring and being involved in some extracurricular activities with them, essentially just volunteering at a school, like doing the same things that any volunteer at any elementary school would be doing. What happens is Alex, the preacher there, travels to visit a couple of other churches, and while he's at one of the churches in the U.S., in Florence, Alabama, he meets Kyle Butt. Kyle Butt says, look, I work for Apologetics Press, and I wonder if there's any way we could help you with your school ministry. And so Alex says, sure there is. If there are some books that you have available, and two books were specifically picked. One is Truth Be Told, which is about exposing the myths of evolution, and the other one is How Do We Know That There Is a God? Both from Apologetics Press. I haven't read either one, but I've read enough of Apologetics Press material to have a decent handle on what some of the things are they might be saying. And essentially it would be scientific and philosophical arguments that would be brokered to demonstrate that there must be a God if we're here at all, if there's a creation, and further to demonstrate that a lot of the arguments put forward by evolutionists, a lot of the reasoning and a lot of the science is simply lacking and just not good at all in terms of proving a theory that's supposed to account for how we got here and how the diversity of species that we see can be explained. So those were the books, and on one occasion the volunteers at the school had an opportunity to offer these books to some of the kids that were there. It would have to be the older kids because these books are written for a slightly older audience. And I would suggest to you that much like some of the material I've passed out to kids who come to this church here for day camps and things like that, or kids that I meet at a town event, I'm not giving them material for themselves. I'm giving them material for them to take home and discuss with their parents. And the way the material is written and the content of the material is a clear indication of that. So that's simply what happened. They put out these books, and the fairly dramatic language used by the headlines are, of course, sensationalized to sell newspapers, but completely misrepresent the situation. One, they're talking about a Church of Christ which is based right there in the local community. It's not based in the U.S. or based anywhere else. It's based right there in Kilbride, Scotland. The other problem with it is they weren't preaching to the kids. They were helping them out with school. They were filling the same role that many volunteers fill in schools, which is to bolster the efforts of teachers and other staff and help kids to succeed at gaining an education. Now, there's a couple of things that you ought to know about this. The first one is one of the parents was a man by the name of Paul Sanderson, who is a prominent member of the Scottish Secular Society. Now, Scottish Secular Society, you can well imagine what they would think about even the suggestion in an educational setting that maybe this world was created by God, not explained by purely naturalistic, materialistic processes. And so part of the thing that I want to say about this is that some of the parents involved, their own beliefs, their own faith. And by the way, atheism is faith. There's not enough evidence to conclude that there's no God. There's no possible way that a thinking person can rationally claim that evolution explains the world and everything in it. They only accept those tenets because they want them to be true, because they want there to be no God. And so when some people have their faith questioned, they get upset about it. And by the way, some Christians do that as well, and we ought to be more mature than that. We should be able to deal with questions about our faith and practice and have at least some ability to answer and respond to those, because guess what? Our kids are going to be bringing home ideas all the time that are inappropriate and not helpful to them. And no newspaper is going to pick up the story and say, wow, parents are outraged because they were taught in school that sexual promiscuity is okay, or that same-sex marriage is okay, or that the world came about by evolution. I have no doubt that my children will be exposed to those things in school, and yet nobody's going to put that on a front page of a newspaper. Further, it needs to be pointed out that the kind of reporting that is represented in this story, and if you've read it, you need to know that the story as presented in its first rendition is extremely light on facts, extremely speculative, and extremely sensationalized to try and make a big deal out of what essentially is not that big of a deal. If you're watching this and you don't want, and you're among the parents who don't want your children exposed to the marketplace of ideas, I hate to say this, but you're going to have to grow up, because your children will be exposed to all kinds of ideas, all kinds of, not just ideas, but practices. And it's our job as parents to prepare our children to think, and think critically, and think honestly and investigatively about the world around them, so that whatever ideas they're presented with, they have a skill set with which to deal with the various things that they're going to be presented with in life. Secondly, if you think that kids are getting what they need to know by being taught evolution as an explanation for the world and everything in it, sorry, but evolution is extremely deficient as a theory about anything, and not terribly helpful in any branch of science. Thirdly, if you're a Christian, and this maybe is the most serious comment about all of this, if you're a Christian who's never said and never done anything that would upset or challenge anyone's thinking, and maybe you hear about the story of this preacher and this church over in Scotland and think, why would they possibly do that? Then you need to consider the example of our Lord. Because the things Jesus said and did and taught got him crucified. And I can't help but notice that this story begs us to examine our own lives and ask, are we following Jesus' example? Is there anyone around us who we've ever said anything to, who we've ever challenged in their thinking in such a way that they would be drawn closer to God? Have we ever faced any negative criticism for anything we've said? Have we ever been challenged about that? If we haven't, if the story of Alex in that small church in West Mains it sounds totally unlike anything that's ever happened to you, maybe you and I should be looking at our own lives and asking, what do we need to be doing differently so that someone somewhere is getting outraged about what we're saying? Someone somewhere is getting upset about what we're presenting, about how we're living, about what we're teaching. Because much of Christian teaching is completely contrary to the culture in which we live. And if we're sharing it openly and honestly, somebody somewhere ought to be getting upset. My prayers go out to the East Mains Church of Christ. I hope that yours will as well. My prayers go out to all of the parents who have children in school who are learning and trying to establish some understanding of the world in which we live. And my prayers go out to Christians who are too shy, too nervous, too afraid maybe too ashamed of the gospel to say anything that anyone may not like. And that's the view from the pew.